Good morning, Morena. On behalf of our Beyond Recruitment team and myself, Lisa Viz, a very warm welcome joining us on this morning's webinar on resilience and wellness, a subject very dear to my heart, with our valued guest, Dr. Harold Hillman. To many of you joining us this morning, Harold Hillman certainly needs no introduction. For attendees who have not attended one of our webinars with Harold before, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Harold. Dr. Harold Hillman is a leadership expert and executive coach. Harold has coached many C-suite leaders across the globe for over 20 years. In New Zealand, Harold has worked with many organisations across both the private and the government sector, and that spans across both central and local government. Harold has authored 2 best-selling books, The Impostor Syndrome and Fitting In, Standing Out. Harold's latest book, Empathy, The Human Side of Leadership, was published in August 2021, earning him the title of the Empathy Doctor by the New Zealand Herald. I have had the great pleasure of partnering with Harold now for over 9 years, and our friendship gets stronger and stronger. What I truly value about Harold is his ability to help one weave real-life vulnerability, self-awareness, empathy, and resilience into the fabric of leadership, both professionally and personally. And his subject matter around authenticity is something that we're all very, very knowledgeable on. In this morning's webinar, Harold will be helping us unpack resilience and personal fortitude. Harold will be sharing some meaningful takeaways to work through these trying times. And these are trying times on the back of COVID, the aftermath of COVID, economic woes, inflation, etc., etc. Before I hand you over to Harold, there were a couple of points I wanted to make around housekeeping. The webinar will finish at about 12 noon. You do have the opportunity to send your questions throughout this session and on this link. There is a Q&A function on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll be collating these questions throughout the presentation. And hopefully there will be time for me to present some of the key themes of your combined questions to Harold at the end of his presentation. However, if we do run out of time, please be made aware that the presentation will be available both in hard copy, but also we'll be recording the presentation. So we will be sending you a recording of the presentation. It now gives me the greatest pleasure to hand over to Harold. So for our audience, please do sit back and enjoy and take on board what Harold has to share, because it is very, very meaningful. And now, Harold, over to you, and a very, very warm welcome.
Lisa, thank you very much. Really, really appreciate that, that warm and very kind introduction. I have truly valued my partnership with Beyond over the I was thinking it was a little bit longer than 9 years, Lisa. I was thinking that it was probably a little bit closer to maybe 12. But I have really valued not only our partnership, but our friendship. Your team is second to none. And given that I work with a number of executive recruitment and leadership recruitment firms across New Zealand, hey, you all are superb. And so I have truly valued the partnership and appreciate the opportunity to join you again this year to really focus on a very important topic, personal resilience and wellness. As you said, we have navigated through 3 years of a global pandemic that has really put resilience and wellness in perspective. And one of the things that I have observed over the last couple of years is that the word care is now working its way into the vocabulary of a number of organizations. And so one of the upsides of the COVID scenario is that we are now viewing people employees, our staff as whole people, and focusing on holistic wellness. I'll start with a focus on adversity, because we typically think about, when I ask people to what's their definition of resilience, very often they will say the ability to bounce back from adversity, or the ability to bounce back or work your way around an obstacle. And that takes me back to, well, 24 centuries ago. I wasn't there, but Dr. Aristotle, in his work with Alexander the Great and other leaders back at the time, Aristotle basically said to them, you cannot build character unless you face into adversity. And that some people are a bit more privileged than others when it comes to having to face into adversity. And so his advice was, go out and seek adversity. If it doesn't knock on your door, you go find it, because the idea is that we grow from experiences that in the moment may seem painful. But then you reflect on it and you look back 10 years later, and there's this wonderful thing called perspective or wisdom, that when we are older in life and we are working with or coaching people who are maybe 10, 20 years younger than us, they may be pushing through something that now your experience has translated into perspective as a coach, or as a friend, and sometimes as a parent, that makes a difference. So it is important. Life brings with it many obstacles and scenarios that feel painful when we're pushing through them. But the whole idea is it does translate into perspective and wisdom. Now, the focus on RQ, the resilience quotient or resilience, is really we began to, or researchers began to hone in on resilience back in the 70s or so. Prior to that, resilience was really regarded as an engineering term, which referred to the structural fortitude of buildings. And so we began to really take a look at resilience and unpack that when it comes to humans over the last, I'd say, 4 decades. And we've learned a lot in that space around RQ. All of us may be used to the term IQ, which refers to intelligence quotient. IQ is deemed to be fairly stable. In other words, you can't really, we are born to be somewhere on a continuum in terms of intelligence quotient, with the great majority of people being in that realm of what we call average intelligence. Intelligence, one of the definitions of intelligence, is the ability to adapt effectively. And adaptation really does correlate strongly with resilience. But in general, IQ is considered to be fairly stable. Then there's EQ, emotional intelligence. That word was introduced to the world in 1995 in a book called Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. And in that book, Daniel Goleman predicted that within 2 decades, which is now, EQ would be more important than IQ when it comes to success in life and leadership. And I think for all of us who navigated through the COVID scenario, we realize that in fact is true. EQ is deemed to be malleable, and that is that you can enhance it through self-awareness. And now, through some wonderful research over the last 5 to 10 years or so, there's the construct of RQ, resilience quotient. So in addition to IQ, EQ, there's the idea that there are some things that you can do. RQ, resilience quotient, is considered to be malleable as well. And that is, if you are purposeful and proactive about it, it really can make a big difference. I was drawn to an article. This was years ago. So it's, 5 years ago in 2018. A Harvard Business Review article, which really highlighted through the research that they had done and consolidating key themes across the research in resilience, that there were 3 things that made a big difference when it comes to resilience. And so I thought I would start off with this, and then I'll take you all through the Mayo Clinic 6 factors that really define RQ. And as I'm going through this, I'd like for you all to just reflect on just personal experiences that you've had in life, and maybe, in the past, or maybe even now, and just jot down some thoughts, or if you have a question at the end. So allow yourself to just really immerse around your own personal experiences and challenges that you have faced to in life. In the HBR article, the first factor that correlated with resilience was, or the key theme, was the ability to accept reality. And that is when something comes upon us very quickly, like COVID, or the sudden death of a loved one, or being made redundant, or something that you didn't expect. There's a natural tendency sometimes to go into what we call the SARA response, SARA being an acronym, SARAH. The S is shock, and that is sometimes we go into shock, and we tend to deny, or just can't deal with what's going on in front of us. Then there is the tendency sometimes to reject what's going on, to go into denial. And that happens very often, where this can't be happening, this can't be true. Let me focus back on what I'm used to, or what works for me typically. Then there's the R, which is reject. And that is, I'm just going to reject. And then there's the notion of accepting, and then sometimes seeking help and support around it. The ability to accept reality quickly is a strong correlate with personal resilience. And so if you find yourself going through those sort of phases in your own thinking, the idea is get there as quickly as you can in terms of what may be the new reality. For some people, the personal resilience is strongly correlated with a deeper meaning to life. And that translates, for people who believe in a God, it translates into spirituality and the whole construct that faith can only grow if it's tested. Sort of the same thing in terms of character. So for many people to be able to put a spiritual context around a challenge is very helpful for them in terms of this is bringing me closer to whoever your God is in that respect. And for people who are not spiritual, or who do not believe in a God, it still applies in terms of the deeper meaning to life. And again, the idea that as you grow through life, you really do grow deeper perspective and wisdom that you are able to share with others, and things that may have seemed painful 10 years ago as you were pushing through it. Now, it has actually contributed to you having some deeper insights around the meaning to life. And then the third factor from this HBR article was the correlation between personal resilience and the ability to improvise. Uncanny improvisers. That's really that whole notion of being adaptive, or adaptability. I remember during the COVID scenario in that very first year in 2020, looking at the news on TV, and they were showing a father who was working out with his two twin sons. His two twin sons were 2 years old, and he couldn't get to the gym, obviously, because that was closed. And so there he was, bench pressing his two sons, his two twin sons. And it was a way to not only spend quality time with them, they were laughing hysterically, his sons were, but he was also getting a really good workout. And the idea that people who are able to adapt real quickly tend to be able to push through adversity or obstacles quicker there around it. I was really drawn during the COVID scenario to research from the Mayo Clinic, a renowned medical clinic in the U.S., based in a number of cities across America. And the Mayo Clinic runs one of the most renowned executive and leadership wellness centers in the world. And so I really kept my eye on what they were evolving in terms of RIQ as the whole world pushed through this scenario. And what I'd like to do is to share with you all 6 factors. If you're thinking about being more proactive and purposeful about resilience, your wellness and resilience, these are 6 factors that you basically want to be able to check off as, yes, I am being proactive about this. Let's hone in on the first one. The first one is the ability to elicit a relaxation response. And that is important. For some people, they practice active meditation to elicit the relaxation response. And that is where the body begins to, it's almost like allowing your psyche to breathe. And so it's unplugging. When we went through the COVID scenario and people were sitting on their laptops from 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. with no breaks, that's really draining on one's psychological and physical energy. And the research certainly suggests that whether it be through active meditation, yoga, some people are really devoted to spending 10, 15 minutes a day just being able to lower the pulse rate in terms of all that's going on. But for some other people, it may be just getting up from the laptop and turning on the music, turning on some soft music, some classical music, whatever it is that you really enjoy. For others, it may be reading. And for some, it may be taking a walk, just walking around and being really present while you're walking around, observing the colors around you, the trees, the forestry, the birds, the colors, all of those things. There's something associated with being very present. And it really is important, if you can, to elicit that relaxation response for at least 10, 15 minutes a day. Many people do it before they go to bed. It is not a good idea to unplug from your laptop after being on it for 12 hours and then to go hop in bed, because the human brain, even though you are attempting to sleep, will continue to process what's there. And even before the global pandemic that we just went through with COVID, the World Health Organization had listed insomnia as a global epidemic in 2019. And so it is important as you are getting ready for bed to really allow your mind and your body to segue and leave those devices out of your bedroom, phones and those things that wake you up in the middle of the night. Relaxation response. Do you give yourself at least 10, 15 minutes a day to just allow your psyche to breathe? And then there's the ability to reframing. And that is, again, back to that whole Sarah response. And when something hits us suddenly and we don't expect it, there is this notion to go into shock and then anger. But that shock component there. And sometimes that can take you inward and downward. I'm a clinical psychologist by background, and so I've done a lot of, I've studied anxiety. I've worked with people in traditional psychotherapy around anxiety disorders. When we are anxious, the definition of anxiety is a fear of the unknown. And so when we are anxious, there's a tendency to go inward and downward in terms of your psyche. You go inward, where you're, really mulling things over in your head, and then downward. And downward really refers to the tendency sometimes to obsess, to ruminate. We've all done it. It's a human response. It is a typical human response, and you can probably reflect back over the last, I don't know, 5, 10 years, certainly as we were going through the COVID scenario, where we didn't know what was happening. We were all on a learning curve, and many of us went inward and we went downward, ruminating and obsessing about what this was going to be. And so the idea behind reframing is to pull your energy and your focus back up and outward. Up and outward, as opposed to in and downward. Again, for people who are self-aware, they can catch themselves going inward and downward. So they can catch themselves just ruminating or beginning to obsess. But can you catch yourself quick enough to bring that back up, that energy back up, and push it out a bit more? It's a completely different perspective on how you face into a challenge. I talk to a lot of my clients and coaching clients to get a feel for whether or not they consider themselves to be an optimist or a pessimist. There's a continuum in psychology. We call it explanatory style, but optimism sits on one end and pessimism sits on the other end. Pessimism often gets demonized as being the bad component, whereas optimism often is viewed as the good one. They both are essential, but keep in mind that when we get anxious sometimes, and again go inward and downward, we're thinking more from that pessimistic end of the continuum, which is to think about what's probable, as opposed to the optimistic end of the continuum, which is thinking in terms of what's possible. They both are important, what's possible and what's probable, but you can consider you can just reflect on the energy associated with those two things. When you're coaching someone, for those of you who are team leaders, and when you're coaching someone who has gone inward and downward, it's important to just ask a few questions, share a story or something that enables them to pick their head back up and face outward into what is possible. Completely two different realms there around that. And so reframing a scenario is the second correlate from the Mayo Clinic research. Physical exercise. We all know this. We have all known this from the time we were kids. The research between wellness and physical exercise is just strong. It is very strong. And there is a circuitous relationship between mental wellness and physical wellness. As humans, we are all subject to anxiety and depression. It's just real. That's how it works. Particularly if we experience a sudden loss. It's called an acute depression, which is meaning it's situational versus chronic. We all have experienced it. There is no human being on the face of the earth who will not every now and then have surges of anxiety or scenarios where all of a sudden they found themselves deflated in terms of their emotional state there. There's a circuitous relationship between physicality, mental well-being, and physical well-being. And that being that people who are sometimes anxious or depressed tend to be less motivated to work out, and their physicality begins to drop a bit. Or for some people who have been injured, who really enjoy working out and who've been injured or cannot work out the way they typically do, they'll find a drop in their emotional well-being. So it is circuitous, and it is important to keep your eye on that, especially the ability, as I talked about with reframing, to lift your perspective up and out. But it is important, no matter what you do, to try to build in at least 3 times a week. That's really the research still seems to be pretty consistent around that in terms of whatever it may be for you. Running, walking, getting together to play tennis with a friend, going out cycling, whatever it may be. It is up to you to determine, but it is healthy. Sometimes with physical exercise, we tend to fit it in as opposed to build it in. And those are two mental models. And with physical exercise, very often, if we're on the road or we're traveling, even on holidays and those types of things, we tend to get out of our routine there. And physical exercise is something that you shouldn't fit in. It's something that you should truly, truly build in. I'm always reminded of when one of my favorite leaders that I've worked with, Andrew Ferrier, joined Fonterra in 2003. And Andrew, heck, he had been there for about a week or so. And one day he was standing at the lift on the 8th floor in his running shorts, in his running shoes, in his shirt. And of course, everybody walked by and was shocked to see the CEO standing there at the lift, ready to go down to do a run. And then Andrew, at his first town hall, or the first meeting when pulling all the staff together, said, "Hey, I think a couple of you have mentioned that you saw me going for an afternoon run." And Andrew made it real clear in terms, this is the significance of leadership shadow. Andrew made it real clear that, hey, I believe that physical wellness is an important part of leadership success. And I'm trying to make the statement to you all that I don't want you fitting in that you're running at 5 in the morning or at 10 at night. I want you to take some time during the day to build it in. And a real cool example around leadership shadow is that within 3 months, we had formed a running club at Fonterra. With about 150 people joining us, and many of us running in that year's marathon. So it's a great example of how what you do sometimes it has more weight than what you say. And that was the example of a CEO who basically was making the statement to his team members: don't fit it in, build it in terms of physical exercise. The fourth correlate is humor. From the Mayo Clinic research, and that the humor is a very good sign that you are keeping things in proper perspective. It is and I'm not talking about a facade of humor, but there is a correlation. If the team leader is not laughing or smiling or finding any joy, even as you push through obstacles, there's a really, really good chance that the team is not laughing. And it gets really hard sometimes. If you all think back to mistakes that you've made in life, or either individually or as a team, and you're pushing through it and everyone's working hard, and there you are, everyone's been in the office for the last 10 hours, and it just helps every now and then. It just helps every now and then to find some humor, and even if it was a stumble that you made, the idea that there's some humor associated with it in terms of what you might be able to move forward with. And so keep your eye on this, especially if you lead a team. Keep your eye on this. I mean, teams are working hard, long hours. It begins to sort of strain on people. You can see it. We've all been there. And it is important. And again, part of that is about lifting perspective back up and out. It is important every now and then to be able to do a chuckle or two around those things that we are pushing through around it. A strong support network is the fifth correlate from the Mayo Clinic research. And that is there's a direct correlation between the size and the strength of the people that you have around you in your life, both in your professional realm and your personal realm, and your own mental, emotional well-being. And the good thing, the upside about having a strong support network is whether it be your family at home, whether it be good friends at work, whether it be good friends that you've had all your life, people that you've known from primary school on up, that type of thing, is that they can often see what you can't see. In other words, a good friend or someone in your support network can come up to you and go like, hey, what's going on? I haven't seen you smile over the last 4 days. What's happening? Or just bring a bit more of an objective perspective on the experience that they're having with you. Now, just like physical exercise, very often we will fit in our support network as opposed to building them in. It's an interesting phenomenon, given that, again, this is one of the 6 correlates of executive wellness and resilience. But we do fit in people who sometimes infuse us with the most joy and positive energy. They make us laugh. When we're on the phone with them, or we have scheduled a 60-minute tea or something like that with them, just to connect with them, and all of a sudden the energy shifts, and it is really, really important around your support network. Don't fit them in. Don't make it 6 months or 7 months before you talk to a dear friend who, every time you hang up from talking with that person, you just feel so good. I mean, you just feel, you're relaxed, you've had some good laughs and those types of things. It's important, really important when you are pushing through pressure points to not just make it all about work, 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 work. Now, many of you all have good friends at work, and so that helps, certainly. But on weekends or in evenings, call a friend. Reach out to a relative. Go knock on a neighbor's door who you haven't seen in the last 4 weeks or so, just to say hello and energize your psyche, energize your perspective. Very, very important. And again, because people around you can help you see what you can't see. And so it enhances self-awareness, which is an important component of emotional intelligence. And then the 6th correlate from the Mayo Clinic research is the ability to know and nurture your passions. Now, as a psychologist, I am a big believer in the whole construct of aptitude. And that is that some of us were just born to do certain things, and we're hardwired for it. I sometimes consider your passions to be your inherent strengths. And that is, some people were born to be athletes. They really were. Some people were born to be musicians, to play music. Some people were born to sing. I mean, just, from the moment they were able to start singing, there's this idea that this is just an inherent strength. Some people are wired aesthetically. In terms of how things are structured or laid out. And my grandson, I have a 6-year-old and 7-year-old grandson named Dean. Dean Herald is his name. And Dean is an artist. He did a painting for me when he was 6 years old, so last year, and I went over to visit them in April. And Dean walked up, and my daughter had it framed, and there was this beautiful painting in there from this 6-year-old. He's inherently wired to paint, to be an artist, to create. No matter what else he decides to do in life, this is something that fuels him. Really fuels him. And that's what a passion is. For many people, it might be traveling. Traveling is a passion for many people. So during COVID, when you couldn't travel, certainly globally, you couldn't travel, it really, it drained the energy of people who just naturally find themselves energized and fueled. It's almost like fuel when you are, when you make time for it and create time for it, whatever it may be. I've got a good friend in the States, Roger is his name. He lives in Chicago. Roger and Barbara have been married for the better part of 40 years, and Roger goes into that kitchen every night. He is a culinary aesthetic artist, and he creates. You can feel the energy in him, and and whatever it may be. For me, it's writing. It's the idea of, in knowing and nurturing your passions, it's the idea of being in flow. And being in flow means I'm out in my garden and, I went out there at 2:00 and then I look at my watch and all of a sudden it's 5:00. And holy moly, where did those 3 hours go? That's being in flow, where you're so absorbed in a way that is energizing you, and fueling you, that time just passes like that. Don't fit in your passions. You got to build them in. You have to build them in. These are things that you were born to do. And we've got to, particularly around physical and mental well-being, we've got to really understand the significance of natural fuel that resides within your own aptitude, whatever that may be. And so it is, what I encourage you all to do is, with your families, here's a point of accountability in terms of lifting your RIQ, your resilience quotient there. It always helps to have other people know what your aspirations are, because they can help keep you accountable, hold you accountable. And that not only includes people at work, but especially people at home, your family members, good friends, those around you. So I say to people I'm working with, coaching clients, this is one of the conversations I have with them. And I will often say to them, if you have any children above the age of 10, take this sheet of paper to the dinner table and sit down, and you and your family have a conversation about those 6 components, not only in terms of what you want to do to be able to lift your resilience quotient, but it's also important for your family members to not only hear how they can help you keep yourself accountable, but also what they may want to do around it as well. And so you take them through it again in terms of the relaxation response, whatever that may be, important to do, particularly prior to bed. And for some people, particularly first thing in the morning, to just get and again, allowing your psyche to breathe, where you're not sitting in front of a screen, immersed in emails or details or obsessing about anything, but just sitting back and relaxing. You can feel the response. The ability to reframe, as you explain this to your family, the idea that, any kid over the age of 10 can relate to this. Something bad happens, they tend to go into the zone of feeling negative and those types of things, and just helping them and yourself to understand that positive versus negative framing is a huge difference around energy. And so whether it be you coaching your 12-year-old or coaching a very experienced person at work, reframing incredibly important. Physical exercise, let your family know what it is that you want to do. Let them know, and be specific in terms of how many times a week and what you're going to be doing, because it's helpful for them to be able to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, are you really holding true to what you said was important? But you, just like the example of Andrew Ferrier that I gave in terms of his leadership shadow, for you as a parent, or for you as a friend for that matter, your leadership shadow is huge as well. And so if family members perceive that this is really something that's important to you, it sends a big message to them and as well around it. Make sure everyone's laughing. It's important. Not silly laughter, but perspective laughter, in the sense of, hey, we're all wonderfully imperfect human beings. If we take the pressure off of ourselves to be perfect, it enables us to find some humor in our wonderful imperfection as we work our way through life. A strong support network. Remember this. When's the last time you reached out to your best friend in the world? It might be your partner at home. It might be someone you went to primary school with. When did you last pick up the phone, or for that matter, even take a short visit just to sit with them for a bit and just energize your spirit? And then finally, as we just talked about, knowing and nurturing your passion. a very important component around resilience. Lisa, I am going to stop there and see if there have been any questions coming in, or if anyone, just as you have been listening, anyone on the call, as you've been listening and you found yourself going inward to really think about something that was a aha for you in terms of your ability to work through things. It'd be wonderful whether you have a question or whether you just have a perspective to share, to hear from you, because that's really the value in these webinars, is to really get connected around questions or perspective.
Thank you, Harold. Some really good information there. In particular, the resilience quotient. I love the way that you've actually set that out, and the 6 factors. And some of your sayings are, just incredible. Don't fit it in, build it in. I'll definitely and certainly remember that. So we've got a couple of questions, Harold.
Yes.
Carol has asked, Harold, can you give some examples of questions you ask someone to get them to go outward and upward?
Sure. And so it is important, as you are pulling a person's perspective upward and outward, not to disempower them. In other words, I've been there, I've done that, so let me tell you how you work through this scenario here. Questions are really important. So I appreciate that particular question. And it is, have you considered a couple of different possibilities in terms of how you might be able to work through this? Do you think that the experience that you have just gone through, because it sounds like it was really daunting for you, do you think that it may overshadow what might be your natural position around how to push into this if you weren't immersed in and to some extent in a degree of pain around it? So how would you, if you hadn't been through this and you were coaching someone else, what would you ask them to consider? That's a very empowering question when you're really trying to lift a person's perspective up and out. And so it's really about, have you considered this? What are your thoughts in terms of these perhaps 3 possible perspectives? Again, don't disempower the person by solving the problem for them. They have to work through it. But your questions, a question is a good way to just get their attention, and all of a sudden, let's think in terms of what's possible, not just what's probable, but what's possible out there. And you will almost immediately see a tangible difference in their energy as they begin to lift up and consider what other avenues might we have to work our way around this scenario there. It's the idea that the obstacle is still there. So we're going to have to work our way around it as opposed to pushing through it. And so how can we do that? What's the way for us to do it? Ask questions that have the person, that really enable the person to think in terms of what's possible, as opposed to being stuck and mired down.
Thank you, Harold.
Yes, Lisa.
Thank you, Harold.
Yes.
Another question, which is an interesting question, and then I'll follow that with another question, because a few people have asked about reframing, just so that you're aware.
Yes.
Jennifer asks, regarding knowing and nurturing your passions, what if your passion is your work, which is a blessing, but balance can be difficult? How do you manage the balance of your passion of work?
Yeah,
I guess I suffer from that.
Many of us do. Many of us do. So look, I've been pleased to see that over the last decade, there's been a reframing around what we used to call workaholics. And that you don't see that word a whole lot anymore in the research around it, because it was deemed to be a bit judgmental for those people who really do love their work. They love getting immersed in their work. And so it was the idea that if you really immersed yourself in work and worked longer and perhaps harder than the person who sat to your left or your right, there would be a bit of a judgment on you as not having balance, or not being able to prioritize, or those types of things. And so the research over the last decade has basically nullified that whole notion of the prejudice against people who really do find their work to be a passion. And I would say, if that is the case, then go for it. As long as you're following those, I would say, following the other 5 correlates in the Resilience Quotient. It is nice to have some balance. I worked in the Wall Street environment where, many people worked anywhere between 12 to 15, sometimes 18 hours a day just to go home, get 2 hours of sleep, change their clothes, and come back in. That's a bit extreme, and something that even though I can work long hours, trust me, that was real extreme. And so there's a line there. But for those of you who love what you do and really love what you do and you're energized by it, push back on any judgment that somehow you've lost balance in life, especially if it fuels you. But keep your eye on those other 5 factors as well.
Thank you, Harold. One of the themes that keeps coming up is reframing. And so if I group those questions together, I guess people are asking more for you to talk through the how on reframing.
Yeah, it is it's one of those things that the older you get, you really can appreciate how a tough scenario that you push through has contributed to what you would consider to be perspective or wisdom. And I pushed through some obstacles as I was going through them in my own life and in my own career as well. What I would say is, yeah, there's going to be some pain sometimes, just natural. There's going to be some pain, some anxiety, some angst associated with working through a scenario. I think back to my decision to come out of the closet after having served in the U.S. military as an officer. I was a closeted gay officer in my early 40s. I was married with 2 daughters, and I was very unhappy. I felt like I wasn't living an authentic life, and that sometimes you'll stimulate the adversity. I could have easily remained in a scenario where I progressed through my life as an inauthentic person. But I, in that case, instigated the pain, which I knew would be tough. But my faith led me to believe that on the other side of this, I probably would be a happier person, and that would make a huge difference in terms of how I could contribute to the quality of life for others. And it was true around it. And so I make the case that in some cases you have to make a tough decision. If you are in a scenario that is draining you, and where you just don't believe that it is healthy, you could stay in that in terms of status quo, but it's not healthy. It's like you need to get on a new curve, and getting on a new curve is a challenging thing, because you go from, at least I know what I can expect here, to, hey, I've got to go up a learning curve here. And so I would just say, in terms of in reframing, think about the next curve. Sometimes that you have to instigate. Sometimes it's instigated upon you. The catalyst is external, but very often the catalyst will be you, whether it be getting out of a bad relationship, leaving a role that no longer is fulfilling, just personal decisions that will put you on that next curve. Back yourself, the inner coach versus the inner critic, and back yourself and reframing that this is about what's possible on another curve, as opposed to, let me just say, stuck in this scenario here. And so whether it's self-imposed or whether it is something that is beyond your own control, think about the next curve as quickly as possible. How do I start going up that? What do I do? Remember the HBR article that I referred to on that very first, or on one of the first slides there, and that is the ability to accept staunch reality quickly. And then to think, what's the steps, one day at a time, as I make my way through the scenario, as opposed to there's nothing I can do. It's called internal locus of control when you go, I've got some control here. I'm going to start taking one step at a time, or we as a team, one step at a time, versus external locus of control, which is there's nothing I can do. Keep your ears on the inner coach and the inner critic. Those are two important voices. But sometimes when we're facing into adversity, the inner critic is louder. Lisa?
Thank you. Thank you, Harold. That was really good. The questions are coming in fast and furiously. Gemma's asked, is there a questionnaire available that determines current IQ so that you can review over time to monitor progress and growth in this area? It's an interesting one.
There are. Again, I've kept my eye on the Mayo Clinic research, but you can, if you type in Resilience Quotient, you'll get a number of, and I encourage you all to do it. So you'll get a number of models and surveys out there that that you can just use, just in terms of to the questioner's point, where you can track your own progress across time. But even if you just look at the questionnaires, just look at the questions, see how they correlate with the 6 factors that I have introduced today. It just sparks your thinking in terms of what you can do. I haven't worked with any clients with an RQ survey, but they're out there. And I typically am approaching it more from an individual perspective as opposed to the team, but it's an important conversation to have with the team as well. So I would just say go online. You'll find a number of them. Find one that just resonates with you. And then I would just say, particularly if you are trying to enhance your own self-awareness, I would say at least 3 times a year, 3 times a year, every 4 months. Just go back to that question and that questionnaire and just see how your answers may be different from 4 months earlier. 4 months earlier. Lisa?
Thank you. Am I live? Thank you, Harold. Another question here, also quite interesting, from Rachel. Hi, Harold, can you briefly discuss your 4 dimensions of presence and how it relates to resilience?
The 4 dimensions of presence?
Yes.
I actually, I have a model in terms of executive presence with 6 components, and so I'm not quite sure what the 4 are there. But let me, because I realize that it's 11:53. Let me just answer that by saying that it is. Presence is an important component around resilience. I think of, let me introduce this as a tool. It's called the 3 circles. Picture 1 circle, another circle, and then a 3rd circle. On the left is what we would call first circle. And sometimes when we are going through a tough situation, we'll take ourselves into first circle. And first circle is where you are inward. Your energy is pulled inward, and as I said before, downward. We all do it, but it does not enable you to be present. This notion of presence means that you are there in the moment, working through it as opposed to going inward. And every now and then we go into first circle. Then look at the circle to the right, the far right there. That's the third circle. In the middle, there's second circle. So I talked about first, where you tend to go inward. And then in third circle, there's a tendency to go outward. And that is where you become defensive, rigid, you stop listening. We've all been there under pressure, where we're, again, facing into adversity. There's sometimes where our listening goes down. And so in first circle, you're not giving anything because you're inward. And in third circle, you're not taking anything because your energy is outward there. In the middle, there is second circle. And I work with my client groups, both as individuals and teams, for them to understand that the essence of being present, is being in second circle, where there's a give and take as you are providing perspective, even as the boss of a team. You wear your mana well, where you can actually encourage your direct reports to help you think through a scenario. You're still the boss, you're still the decision maker, but the idea of give and take, that's the essence of presence. First circle, third circle, try to move those into that second circle. And there's, put in the second circle into a Google link and you'll get a number of articles on that as well. Lisa?
Thank you, Harold. I think we've got 4 minutes left, and so we've now completed our Q&A. What I would like to add, though, is that we've got a tremendous amount of thank yous in our Q&A. So I just wanted to read a few of them, just to give you an indication, Harold, of just how inspiring you are and how thankful people are for the meaningful takeaways that you've given each and every person that has attended our webinar this morning. For example, this one from Ann Taylor: a giant thank you to you for organizing and to Harold for sharing. He's so inspirational. We are blessed indeed to have an hour with him. No question, this is from Lizzie, no question, but a quick thank you to Dr. Harold Hillman for his webinar and perfectly explained presentation. I found it very inspirational and a great reminder/guide to resilience and wellness factors. Much appreciated. And another one, thank you for sharing your insights on this topic. Loved the circles. Can you please say the name of that again? But I think we don't have time for that. But if you do Google and if you look up Harold's books, you will be able to find more information on the circles, and we will send you more information. That was anonymous. So you know, another one here. Thank you for your valuable presentation, Harold and Lisa. Have to dash to next meeting, the reality of life. So reframing, I guess. So look, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to you, Harold. Harold, you've certainly provided all of us with some very meaningful takeaways and insights, and particularly the 6 factors and some of your punchy quotes that we can draw on. On behalf of Beyond Recruitment, I'd like to thank you all for joining this webinar. Please be reminded that this webinar has been recorded, and we will send every single person attending a recorded copy in the next 2 days. And Harold's slideshow will also be available for you. So we'll send the 2 together. And once again, a huge big thanks, Harold.
Thank
I
you,
do
Lisa.
truly value our partnership, and I look forward to the next webinar that we'll be hosting with you. So once again, have a great day, everybody, and thank you for your time.